examples of things made on the lathe: a set of table legs, a mallet or a wooden hammer. We also have some honey dippers here. Notice everything is round that's made on the lathe. Finally, candlesticks. All are nice, simple intro projects.
So here at the lathe, we have a couple different pieces. This is called our tool rest. This can move around, and it's attached to this thing called the banjo here. We have some adjustment levers here. We can spin this like so, and then tighten this down, and tighten this down also. Now everything is locked there. Also on the back side, this is the tailstock back here. This can move, and when we want to lock it down, we flip this lever and give it a good tap there, making sure that's not moving. And then this is a lock for the quill. This is the quill here. So we want to crank this in and out sometimes, and we want to make sure this is unlocked first. And then this is the headstock, which is where the power and the motor is hooked up to. So this is what's going to be actually spinning our piece of wood here. And then finally, the most important thing here, on-off switch, right? So pull it on, push it off in case of an emergency there. So with our starting to use the lathe, we're going to use this spur drive here, which should come out here. If you're having some trouble, you can put a rod through here and tap it out. And then what we did here is we just lined it up in the center of our workpiece, and we measured to find the center there, lined it up, and gave it some taps with this hammer. We really want to make some nice deep grooves there so that these teeth on this drive grab into the piece of wood, and that's going to be what makes this piece of wood spin as we have it on the lathe here. So now that we have our piece of wood with the indents from the spur drive here, we're going to line this up, making sure that these little dents we make line up with those teeth there. I'm going to hold it there with one hand, and then I'm going to release this and slide it in, making sure my quill is back, so I have space to crank it in here in a second. Now I'm putting it into the center of my piece here. I'm locking it down, and we measured to find the center there and lined it up with that mark in the center. And now I crank on this lever in the back, and this is going to tighten this down. It's pushing it this way, and you just keep cranking on this, and eventually, we want this as tight as possible. Eventually you'll notice that this starts to slide here. And we know when this is sliding, it's not going to get any tighter, and it's pretty much good to go if we know that this is nice and tight. All right, so make sure that's nice and tight. And then before we turn on the lathe, we want to get our tool rest right in there as close as we can. So I'm going to lock this down so it doesn't rotate here. But then before I do this, I want to make sure that I spin it a couple times with my hand over here to make sure it's not going to hit the tool rest here. That's looking pretty good, not going to hit anything. All right, now we're all set with our piece of wood in here, making sure it's nice and tight in there. Double check all our levers one last time, nothing's loose. We can tighten down this lock so nothing comes loose. All right, we're looking good. And as always with woodworking, we are going to make sure our loose clothing is out of the way, our hair is tied back, and our drawstrings on our hoodies are tucked in as well. Whenever we're using the lathe, we're also going to be using a face mask like this, because sometimes pieces of wood fly, and it's just a little nicer to keep them from hitting your face. So always wear this face mask. Also, never leave it face down. You scratch up this and it gets messed up. These are the first tools that we're going to be using on the lathe. We have two scrapers here. One is kind of a rounded nose. The other one kind of has a little bit of a point to it. And we have two skew chisels also, which we're going to use in a very similar way to the scrapers there. So scrapers, skew chisels, but we're going to use them both in the same way. If you have other tools, let's hold off on those for now, and we will look at just these for now. So in a moment here, we're going to be turning on the lathe, but a couple last double checks. We want our tool rest to be slightly below the center here. And when we're using this, our tool is going to come in here, set flat on the metal, and then move into the wood. So it sits on the tool rest here first before slowly moving into the wood here. All right, when we're using this tool, we always have two hands on it, one hand on the back, one hand on the front. I like to keep my front hand up against this piece of metal here, so as I go, I'm going to be moving back and forth like so. Notice my other hand is all the way at the back. The big danger with this tool, if you're not in control and this is spinning, this can push down on the tip, which makes the back side of the tool go up, and this can go flying out of your hand. But if you're holding on to this with the back hand and keeping it nice and steady with the front hand, you're going to be perfectly all right. So when we go to turn this on, I have my tool off the tool rest, I'm standing back, and then I can turn it on. Now I'm going to take and set the tool flat on the tool rest, keeping it level to the ground, right? It's not going down like this, not going up like this, keeping it level to the ground. And we're just gonna slowly move in. Notice that the tool has this edge up, so it's spinning this way and coming down on this side, which is what's causing it to scrape here. Now I want to stop, so I'm taking the tool all the way out of the machine and turning the tool off. And every once in a while, as you get the piece of wood gets smaller, you need to move your tool rest a little closer to keep it working safely there. So now we can start thinking about the shapes we want to play with. If we are using this tool, we can make little triangular valleys with a little sharper bottom to it, like you see here. And just like I was mentioning, I'm going down to the bottom of the valley, right? Starting at the top of the mountain, going down to the bottom of the valley, like so. Then, once I have two valleys next to each other, I can play around with rolling out that shape and rotating my hand a little bit to get kind of circular shapes like this. Last things before you take your project off the lathe here. It might be a little rough still, which is perfectly fine and normal when you're using the lathe. But we can use some sandpaper on this before taking it off. So we loosen the banjo here, that bottom piece, and kind of get this out of the way. And that should slide, there we go. Now what's going to happen here is you're going to sand this using your hand, and you can just kind of bend your paper a little like this, or have a crease on a fold like that to kind of get into sharp corners here. But notice I have my hand under the piece of wood here. If I put my hand on top, it's spinning towards me this way, and I can jam up my hand a little bit. So just taking the paper, moving it around. If I stay in one spot too long, it's going to heat up and burn my piece of wood. And I'm starting with some rough paper, and I can work my way up to smoother papers too, just like normal sanding. Right, getting in all those corners. Maybe I like to do this sometimes, getting those curves, bending it like so. Couple last reminders for safety on the lathe. Before turning on the machine, make sure everything is secure, everything's nice and tight and snug here. Our tool rest is nice and close to the piece of wood. Small gap here is good. And when we go to turn on the machine, we are going to stand back to the side a little bit to turn it on, just in case something starts flying off the piece of wood for some reason. Also, when we go to come into the piece of wood, with our tool, we are going to have two hands on the tool, holding it, one hand in the back, one hand in the front. We're going to set it on the tool rest, move slowly into the piece of wood. When we first start to touch it, then we start moving around nice and slow, nice and slow, nice and slow. And then just like I did to turn it off, we remove the tool first, and then we go turn off the power switch. And we are always going to be wearing the safety shield